talk.
My name is Alysia, and I'm a software engineer at Espresso Systems. And today I'll be talking to you about the future of rollups. They will be interoperable, performant, and sovereign. So currently, we have over 30 rollups that are scaling Ethereum, and over 30 billion TBL across these rollups, and over 30 bridges trying to connect us together. But that means we can also say that there are over 30 sequences. So what exactly is the job of a rollup sequencer? So the sequencer takes the transactions that the user submits, it selects them and orders them, and sends them in a block on the rollup as well as the Ethereum network. So in order to understand how sequences work and why we just started talking about sequences in layer 2s, let's walk through the transaction lifecycle on layer 1. So a user submits the transaction, it enters the mempool, and then the validator will select the transactions from this mempool in such a way to optimize revenue as well, so selecting the higher gas fees and priority fees, and then submits that block. And then the other validators in the network will then verify this block based on the protocol rules. Finally, the validators agree, and we can say that the blockchain state is final. So finality is a state that all blockchains try to get to, and this is very important. So if we were to compare the transaction lifecycle in L2 versus L1, we would see that the sequencer is doing what the validator does. So the validator selects and orders transactions, and so does the sequencer. The sequencer also submits a batch of transactions to the layer 2 and also to the layer 1. But the thing is, with the sequencer, even though we have the transactions submitted to the layer 2, we still have to wait for finality in L1. We still have to wait for those transactions to be confirmed in L1. So then you're thinking, OK, so layer 2 finality depends on layer 1 finality, but layer 2 is meant to make transactions faster. So how does this work? So we have to now distinguish between pre-confirmations and finality. How many of you have heard about a pre-confirmation before? OK, cool, good. I'm glad it's not many of you, because even for me, before working at Espresso, I never heard about it. But yet still, we all interact with pre-confirmations. When we submit a block to the blockchain, it takes about 15 minutes, 12 to 15 minutes on Ethereum, for that block to be finalized. However, when we're interacting with apps and MetaMask, we see that the transaction is confirmed within about 2 minutes. So therefore, what we get is not actually a final transaction, but a pre-confirmation that this will definitely or eventually be finalized. So similarly, in layer 2s, when you're interacting with the layer 2, when the sequencer submits the block to the layer 2, you have a pre-confirmation that this will eventually be finalized on L1. This is very important for the rest of the talk, so that's why I had to distinguish between the two. So today, layer 2s are isolated chains. And it makes sense in a way. Like the first time I had to use a layer 2, I had to bridge my assets from Ethereum to the rollup. And that was really confusing to me, because I'm like, why is it a separate network? I thought I'm just meant to be using Ethereum, but faster. So layer 2s actually have a completely isolated chain, which means they have a separate mempool, a separate sequencer, and that leads to some drawbacks, such as interoperability. We know that it's hard for us to communicate across these rollups, and we have slow bridging and centralized bridges as a result. And that is because the layer 2 chain, like if we have two rollups that want to communicate with each other, they can't do it directly. First, the transaction has to be submitted to L1. We have to wait for finality at L1, which takes about 12 to 15 minutes. And then the second rollup can read L1 and then see, OK, I see, now it's finalized, and then do some other action. So let's imagine that we now have a shared sequencer. Now we'll have one party that is able to verify transactions from multiple chains at the same time. So now we can say that I have a pre-confirmation that something that happened in rollup 1 is also going to now affect something that happens in rollup 2. So this can be very advantageous, and we can start dealing with problems that we have around bridging and interoperability. And if you guys were here for the sequencer talk earlier, normally if you have a shared sequencer, it tends to be a decentralized network, it tends to be a blockchain, so therefore you can have more crypto-economic security guarantees. The issue that we had, however, is that when we spoke to rollups and layer 3s, they actually had an issue with sovereignty. They would still like to maintain sovereignty over their sequencer. So the solution that we came up with is the Espresso marketplace, where essentially Rollups have the opportunity to sell sequencing rights on this marketplace. So it's a two-sided marketplace. We have Rollups on one side. On the other side, we have proposers, or we like to call them sequencers, and they're able to bid to sequence for one or many Rollups at the same time, which means these Rollups will get many benefits, such as now they have value creation and capture. So essentially, we have a bunch of sequencers that are bidding to sequence for one or many rollups at the same time. These bids will now be given to the rollups, and now they have a new revenue stream. And now they're able to attain sovereignty. They can choose when they would like their blocks to be sequenced. They may not want it to be sequenced by external parties every single time. Sometimes they may self-sequence, sometimes they may not. They can also set a reserve price. Based on how much revenue they normally generate, they can decide, you know what, I'm okay with having external sequencers sequence for my chain, but I know how much money I normally make when I sequence for myself. So if you are bidding to sequence for my chain, for the very least, give me this much. And we have interoperability enhancements as well, like I described previously, because it is still a shared sequencer network. And due to decentralization, we now have this pre-confirmations, because remember I said the sequencer gives you a pre-confirmation, that you can now trust with a higher guarantee because it came from a decentralized network versus a centralized sequencer pre-confirmation, which is what we're dealing with today. And fast finality is another concept you start hearing many blockchains, or not blockchains, but many protocols talk about as well. And that's essentially the idea that we can now trust these pre-confirmations that we are getting from these sequencers because it comes from a decentralized network. And this can be very useful for things like making bridging better and faster. So for example, at ETH Denver this year, we had our CEO, Ben. He showed a POC between a cross-protocol and Espresso systems, showing that we were able to bridge in just 7 seconds. And 2 of those seconds was the fast finality achieved on the Espresso hotshot finality layer. So 3 things I want you to know about the future of Rollups using Espresso. The Espresso marketplace will help Rollups not only maximize value, but improve user experience because they will now be able to attain things like atomic inclusion and atomic execution. Now this enhanced interoperability will become a non-negotiable. As users, we will get used to this concept, and we will have more, better bridging and faster bridging using the Espresso fast finality gadget. And then finally, developers as well will want to build with Rollups who are interoperable or who make interoperable more easy, and they can take advantage of things like defragmented liquidity, atomic execution, etc. So thank you so much for watching this lightning talk. And if you'd like to learn more about sequencers and the Espresso marketplace, check out Espresso Systems on Twitter. Myself, I'm Alysia Tech, and also Verity, she's the head of partnerships. So if you're a Rollup or a bridging protocol, definitely reach out. Thank you. I don't know if I have time for questions, but...
Yeah, maybe one question, and yes. And then you'll definitely, I'm sure you'll be here to answer some curious questions later.
I think someone is saying no. No questions.
Hey,